All right, me. It is Wednesday, I'm pretty sure. And today I finished reading Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. The thickness of this book does not portray the actual length of the book. Franz Kafka, as I think previously mentioned when I did the trial, is like crosses this weird boundary between long short stories and very short novellas. Even in this printing of this version, I mean the Metamorphosis is only 50 odd pages long. It's only 3 chapters, right? And so it kind of bridges this kind of weird gap. I read this pretty much in 2 sittings. I read the vast majority of it while I was sitting and waiting for an oil change. So just reading in my car in the cold. And then I finished it out this evening after rehearsal. Just because it was like, okay, I only have 11, 12 pages left. But yeah. Fantastic piece of literature. I believe it is the longest complete work of Franz Kafka's. The trial is longer, but it is incomplete, if I remember correctly. So the Metamorphosis is the longest piece that is complete. Yeah. Anything else before I get into the book itself? Oh, my teacher that was next to me in North Carolina loved this book and teaching the Metamorphosis. There was a video that was about the Country Doctor, which is another piece by Franz Kafka that he loved showing because it scared his kids so much, but it also very much intrigued them of like, where are we going with this? So yeah. The work itself, right? Beautiful, fantastic, right? Gregor Samsa is transformed into not really a cockroach. I think that's been, in general, that's I think what a lot of people take it as. But I mean, it's got wings. It's got it's much more beetle-like than a cockroach. But some sort of a monstrous insect of some sort. And his life has gone from being this traveling salesman that is supporting his parents and his sister to being this monstrosity, right? And it's now a question of, is this Franz Kafka just being weird and saying that, this guy really is a bug? Or is there something else that is occurring here? And initially the first thing that I thought of is dealing with like onset disability in some way, right? Whether that is through or onset inability, not necessarily disability, but right, but that covers a lot of different ranges of people getting to the age or point of where people must take care of them. They cannot take care of themselves. Mental diseases and cognitive diseases that end up being more onset later in life. Physical disabilities, but then also like physical injuries that then cause you to not be able to work in some capacity, right? That's where my mind first went with it. And I think that I think it kind of follows this path, right? Because your metamorphosis of Gregor Samsa is very much this. He has gone from the caretaker of the family to then being this outcast that needs to be taken care of, to then completely ignored by the family, right? And that really kind of follows that pattern, right, for a lot of people that then gets moved into or are needed to be taken care of very suddenly in some ways, right? Of where in a family that is struggling, whether that be financially or with just life in general, and the you know, the issues of living in a capitalistic society, right, is the gradual movement from wanting to continue to make them feel like they are at least something in some part of the family, to then being someone who is a burden that must be taken care of in you know, a capitalistic society, right? Which is not fair to the person that needs to be taken care of, right? But that is certainly the way that a lot of people end up feeling about it. And that's, you know, the initial thought that I had with what this actually means, what this is actually talking about. Yeah. You know, I think there are some other aspects that can be taken into this, because this was published in 1915, right, which is then posthumously after Franz Kafka. But, you know, I think that you can then also read this very much into a religious aspect of looking at the treatment of people of Jewish faith, right? And especially if this was to be written, you know, 20 years later, or really 10 years later, I should say, you would really be able to read into that of people of Jewish faith throughout Europe being shunned and being treated as lepers, in effect, and being shut out and then ignored. So yeah. So that's, you know, the main metamorphosis of, right, that is Gregor Samsa going from being human to being this monstrosity, whatever it is. But then you also have, you know, these other metamorphoses, right? There's the entire family that changes, right? Of where there are so many hopes and dreams and their livelihood that is based around Gregor Samsa earning money. And then when he no longer can, everyone shifts their perspective, right? And shifts what they are doing. And you have this, I mean, it's in effect a cultural shift, right? And it's a societal shift that you know, is present, of where you're moving from, in a society and cultural aspect, many of the well-to-do families, right, ones that can employ a maid, right, and employ a housekeeper and employ a cook. And so they're, even though they're only living off of one salary, they're still well-to-do. And then to keep up, you know, 80% of the lifestyle that they've been living, right, then it transitions into a family workload where they need to have all three members still working besides Gregor. And even then, right, they have to eventually take in boarders to still achieve, you know, even some modicum of what their life was once like. And, it is, you can view some economic commentary there. You can read some social changes in the world that are occurring, of where it is no longer just seen as, in a Western civilized world, that women are to only do housework and housekeeping, and that men are to then leave the house and make money, right? And it's a changing world, and things like that. But even more specifically, you can focus on the metamorphosis of, I think her name's Grete, who is Gregor's younger sister. I think the entire story of the Metamorphosis occurs effectively over a year. But within that, right, Grete starts off, or Grete, something of that sort, starts off as a 17-year-old girl that is still very naive, very young. Gregor describes her as still being a child, who has this dream of, and Gregor wishes to fulfill it, of going to the conservatory and studying music there. And then the tragedy happens to Gregor Samsa, and she has to give up on that, but then and begins into this working lifestyle that she's kind of forced into, of where she is taking care of her parents, but then also taking care of Gregor, and working, and studying, and doing all of these things. And then she, at the very end, becomes this kind of new thing that the parents are putting all of their faith into, and hopes and dreams into, of where she has become this very beautiful young girl who has skills and has talents, but is also a very hard worker. And now all of their hopes now rest in her, right? Which is, an interesting metamorphosis, right? Of within a year, this year of transitioning from being a minor to being an adult, of suddenly having all the hopes of the world placed on you, is a fascinating little metamorphosis that occurs. You also have her attitudes towards Gregor change a whole lot, of where Sheehan is the one that is initially taking the most care of Gregor, feeding him, cleaning his room, all of these things, and then eventually transitions to her viewing Gregor as this massive burden that they must then chase out of the house, right? And it's, I think you can view it as like a betrayal, and you can view it as like a backstabbing of some sort, that this person that for the first 2 chapters is seemingly the most caring person in the world, suddenly is the biggest proponent for your downfall. But is also this like transition of, as I mentioned, like this wanting to become a caretaker, to viewing this thing as a burden, right? And it's not a happy transitional thought to think about, and transitional idea to think about, but it is one that is very true for a lot of people, of where they begin taking care of things, right? And taking care of people, taking care of animals that cannot support themselves. And many people begin doing it out of the love they have. And then there becomes a point of where it can feel like life is on hold at that point, right? And I would argue that it's probably the feeling that Greta gets, is that, you know, she is this young girl who is becoming an adult and you know, has her whole life ahead of her, and is on the verge of being able to kind of choose what she wants to do, and then it all kind of falls apart because of this tragic incident. And now, instead of being able to pursue what she wanted to do and everything, she's now asked to become everything for this family, right? And so it can be, you know, eventually be viewed as a burden, right? Yeah. A very, very philosophical piece, I would argue, of where even just thinking about it a little bit can pull out some very, very interesting points in discussion and things. So that's the Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Yeah.